The X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, the X Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
You doing that thing you do, breaking my heart into a million pieces, like you always do.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host, I'm your guide, as together we cross this time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to send me an email, it's very simple, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And if you'd like to see the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour, X-Zone Nation, is a gentleman we've had the pleasure of having on the show many times before. His name is Joshua Shapiro. And Joshua has been involved with crystal skulls since 1983, when he saw one made out of amethyst in Northern California. The name of this crystal skull is Amy. He felt such a strong connection with this artifact that since that time he has devoted his life and resources to sharing the best information he can about these crystalline artifacts with others, people all over the world. Joining me now is Joshua Shapiro. And Joshua, welcome back to the X Zone. Always great having you with us.
Thank you so much, Rob. A pleasure to be here again.
Joshua, you, in my opinion, are one of the top authorities when it comes to the crystal skulls. You and I have talked many times over the years about these magnificent artifacts. And over the years, you have done so much. You have gone to many places. You have spoken to many people about these mysterious artifacts. And what have you learned over the years that you can share with our listeners?
Well, I think I need to go back to day one of being a crystal skull explorer, as I call myself, when I met this crystal skull, Ami, that you mentioned in the intro, the amethyst skull, because I received a message when I saw that crystal skull, first a picture of it, then in person,
Mm-hmm.
and that was in 1983. So what is that, 35 years ago?
My gosh,
now.
yeah.
And I think that the message that I received by being in the presence is still very important. And the sensings that I received from being around that crystal skull, of course, it's been amplified many, many times over the years, was that these skulls have, and I know when I was on the Sci-Fi Channel, they did not the Sci-Fi Channel, there was a group for the Smithsonian
Mm-hmm.
that we discussed this on the documentary they did. And it's very difficult to prove, but you asked me, what do I think? What's
Yes.
my experience been?
Yep.
And I really believe that there's some kind of living intelligence or consciousness that is connected to these artifacts, which communicates with people telepathically. I'm not the only one. I've spoken to many people who I consider to be crystal skull guardians. So if that indeed is possibly true, the message which this amethyst skull gave me, called to me, was, we are returning to help humanity to create world peace. And that was the essence of what I felt when I was around it. So I kind of agree with some of the indigenous people that I've met, the shamans, the elders, who also are familiar with the crystal skulls, especially the Mayans, and they talk about them as being sacred objects. And I have a memory, although, when you have these past life memories, how can we prove it? But I have a memory of working with them in Atlantis, like a priest in the temples. And I just think that advanced civilizations in the past worked with them. They may be like computers. They may have programmed them with incredible knowledge and information, with healing energy. And this is part of the reason why I think it's very important as they're coming back. Now, of course, as we've talked about before, there are crystal skulls being carved by modern carvers, and there's a big debate over whether there's any significance to that versus some that have been found around or close to ancient ruins, like in Mexico and Central America, etc.
Well, it's funny when people talk about the crystal skulls that modern day artisans and sculptors have created. They look at it with a negative slant, but yet if somebody does a crucifix, they're said, well, that's good, because what they're doing is they look at it through a positive aspect. So I don't understand why the negativity with one and the positive feelings about the other, especially since the crystal skulls have a much longer historical presence than Christianity does.
Definitely. I think the main challenge that comes up, let's say if you're having a conversation between a person who is following a spiritual path versus a religious path, is from the religious point of view, they look at the skull. Now, this is what doesn't make sense to me. The skull is being something that represents death and doom. Perhaps because if you see a bone skull of a person who was alive and now they're dead, there's a great fear of death, although I think this is changing because there's so many people now that are having either an out-of-body experience, a near-death experience. They're talking about things, communications through mediums, talking with spirit on the other side. So to a religious person, the connotation is more dark with that. But that doesn't make any sense, because that is an important part of every human being's body, the skull.
Exactly.
And if there was a higher intelligence that decided to create the form of humanity, whether you want to call it galactics or angels or God, or this is one of the great mysteries that we have. Where did humanity come from? How did we get to shape this body? Was it evolution, or was there some intelligent beings that got involved in this and helped in it? I can't believe that the shape of the skull is the only part of the human body which is death, doom, and evil, and the rest of it is okay. The skull houses our brain, which allows us to have communication, to communicate with each other. But also, I believe there's parts of the brain we don't understand that's receiving, other cosmic knowledge and information, if you will. So the brain is a very important part of who we are, and the skull protects it, and it's part of who we are. So I've always seen the crystal skulls, even from day one, as always being a very powerful and positive thing for humanity. And like you said, I've worked very hard and tried to provide for people the best information and let them decide, what do you think? How do you feel about it? But really the key is you have to have a personal experience with one. And once you do, then things start to change for you immediately.
Crystals have been used in radio communications, from the very start. When we used to have the crystal radio sets that got me going in radio many years ago. As a child, it brings in information. It's a very important part of any radio system. So why do people find it so implausible that the information that you are sharing, where it could be or is a form or a piece of let's say equipment, for lack of a better word at this time, that is bringing in information, and all we need to really do is have the same type of experience that you and other people have had, drop the bias and say, you know what, it is possible.
Yes, definitely. And all of my experiences around crystals has been, I feel like I'm enhanced.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's an energy connected with the crystal, which has a symbiotic relationship with the energy of a human being. I think Marcel Vogel, before he passed away, he was doing a lot of research. He had a center in San Jose, California, and this was one of the areas that he was looking at, is what was the relationship between the effect of a quartz crystal upon a human being. And he found that there was some symbiotic energy that, if a person really understands and is open to it and starts to work with crystals, whether it's in the shape of a skull or just a crystal, it is enhancing a person. A lot of times what I've done, as you know, I've written a number of books, is I'll take one of my crystal skulls and I'll just put them like kind of by the computer as I'm typing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems to give me more clarity of mind, and it's easier for me to write. The words are just coming out very easily. And, so this is one of the things that crystal skulls have helped me with, I guess, my creativity. Or, a lot of people will say, Joshua, when you're in your house, you're so quiet, but then put you up on the stage and start sharing about these things you love, and the crystal skulls are around, and you become almost like an actor and you're animated. So that's been the effect the skulls have had on me. It just amplifies my gifts and animates me and links me into things sometimes I don't even know, and all of a sudden I just have a clarity and understanding about something, and I share it with people, and it makes a lot of sense. So I really like crystals. I think they're one of the most powerful tools that we have right now, besides the fact that all of our technology is based upon quartz.
All right,
crystals.
let's hold it right there, Joshua. You and I have to take our first break. Exo Nation, Joshua Shapiro is my special guest, a good friend of the Exxon. His website is cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the Exxon. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
I was waiting for so long for a miracle to come. Everyone told me to be strong. Hold on and don't shed a tear. Through the darkness and good times, I knew I'd make
Welcome back, everyone. My guest this hour is Joshua Shapiro. And as I said during the first segment of the show, in my opinion, he is one of the leading world authorities when it comes to the crystal skulls. And he has had the opportunity that I wish I had in having a personal experience with a crystal skull. And the experience that Joshua had in his early days has led him to many places around the world, talking to many people, getting the message out to the masses about the crystal skulls. His website is cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. Joshua, thanks so much for coming back. What was it like that very first time that you had your experience with Ami?
Well, the first time I had really contact with Ami, it was through a picture of it. I had a friend who actually, I guess, had this skull in her home for a couple of days, and then she was allowed to take pictures. So I went to her store because I was sharing with her copies of my first book, Journeys of an Aquarian Age Networker, which I did back in the early 1980s. And then she pulled out this picture of the skull, and I had I call it an energetic response to it. I actually felt vibration inside. I called it an inner earthquake. And then while we were looking at the picture, there was a real earthquake in California because this was in San Jose. So that got my interest, and, I'm an Aries. So if I see something that's different or unique or, is an experience I can have that I've never had before, then I'm going to inquire. So I said, is there any chance I could actually see the real skull? And then about 3 weeks later, some person was coming through San Jose. He claimed to be quite wealthy. The people who had the skull at this time, they were owners of an art gallery. They wanted to sell this artifact. So because I was connected to this woman who was the owner of the store, I got invited to go and actually see the crystal skull. And basically what happened to me is I was allowed to touch it. And as I was touching it, I felt, I would say, an energy. It was with my right hand on the top of the skull. An energy came from the skull up through my hand, through my arm, to my shoulder. And then, although one of my inner gifts is not inner vision, in my mind's eye, ever since that day, I always see that skull kind of floating over my right shoulder, as if I somehow connected with it and my spirit or my soul is connected with it. And then the next time I got to see that skull, we were able to arrange with the owners of the skull, and I think this was in the early 2000, like 2001 or 2002. We went to San Jose, and they actually allowed us to bring a device called a meridian stress test system, which I don't know if all your listeners know about it, but it's a really powerful machine. And we were testing people because it measures the vibration in the meridians in the hands and the feet. We were able to see what effect that crystal skull was having upon people that we tested it with. But for me, the most important experience with it was I got to sleep with it. It was next to my head. Mm-hmm. And I also put one of my personal skulls, Portal de Luz, which is our large smoky quartz skull done by a Brazilian carver that I've had for many years. And then I actually got to do meditation with both skulls. I have a picture of that somewhere. And that was a really powerful meditation. So this is how I got to know this skull. This was, some of the effects that it had upon me. But it's one of my favorite ones because really it's the one that activated me to my search to want to know more. And I've never stopped, and I probably never will stop until the day I pass on to spirit.
What kind of dreams did you have the night that you actually slept with the crystal skull?
Well, I'm not really a good person to talk to about dreams, Rob, because I don't have too many. Okay. And I don't remember having a dream. I just kind of felt like, I think what I recall is when I went to sleep and I woke up, it felt as if almost no time had passed. So it wasn't so much I had a dream. I don't know if I had such a restful sleep that time went by, or being in the presence of my own skull with that skull, I went way, way out. I believe we leave our body. I could have gone into some other dimensions. But what's interesting is when I was in Peru, now this is where I'm looking for the blue skull in Peru, which is a whole other story. And I'm redoing that book right now. I'm updating it. I did actually have a dream when we were close to the area high up in the Andes Mountains where I'm looking for this crystal skull. And I remember I had a dream where there was a blue skull that showed up in my dream, but it wasn't the one I was looking for. I just knew it was a skull that was blue. And I put that in this book, Search for the Blue Skull. And there was a lady on the East Coast, I think it was I don't know if she was in Connecticut or Maine, somewhere up there, read the book, and she felt she had to send us a blue crystal skull that she had in her that she had actually purchased, and it came right around my birthday a few years ago, and that was a lapis lazuli skull. So that was connected kind of to a dream, but mostly my dreams aren't that affected by the skulls.
How many skulls have been found to date?
Well, I don't think anybody really knows how many have been found, because what happened is when I first started in the early 1980s, there were only a handful of crystal skulls that were known,
right? Like
the one in the British Museum, the Paris Mitchell Hedges. But what's happening now is there are many skulls that are not only coming out of Mexico and Central America that are being found. And in Mexico, people were telling me literally they were kicking the ground and a skull would roll out of it. But also there's a whole different type of skulls that are coming out of like Tibet and China, which don't look human-like at all. They're like stylized skulls made out of every gemstone that you can imagine. They have very strange shape. We actually now have 2 skulls that are like that. And their energy is very much different than a lot of the other crystal skulls that I've seen. So I would have to say now there are hundreds or thousands of skulls that are coming out. And according to the message I received from Ami, it was like Ami was preparing me like his brothers and sisters are all going to just start coming out, like in the future. So now we're 35 years later. Whereas the time when I saw me, there were not so many. Now there are hundreds or thousands of them. And then, of course, all the experts are saying, well, these are modern skulls, so they're fake. And even the skull in the British Museum, they're calling a fake. So it's really hard to try to find kind of a marriage between researching something from the paranormal and researching something from the scientific and trying to find the bridge that connects those two. So we don't really have that many scientists that are interested in finding out why do these skulls have this energy and why are they having such a power effect upon people. But I'm hopeful in the future that, I'll meet some scientists who may be intrigued by this and that we can actually do some, real true tests, like working with the meridian stress test system, which is a very good system for diagnosing people what's wrong and going on in their body by measuring the meridian energy. It also seemed to also measure the energetic effect of the skulls on people, and it was pretty amazing, the numbers that I was coming up with. I tried to share this with the Sci-Fi Channel because they interviewed me for their, TV documentary they did when the Indiana Jones film, last one, came out, but they didn't use it in the documentary probably because they couldn't understand what I was trying to explain to them from the results. But it's very interesting how if a crystal skull is around a person, it does impact how they're doing energetically and, feeling and health-wise. So, but this should be researched scientifically more. I think it would be amazing what we could learn from that.
35 years later, Joshua, do you have any idea where these skulls come from?
Well, I have, of course, my own theories. Definitely, I would have to say the extraterrestrials are involved in bringing them here. Now, why do I say that? Well, number one, there are a few crystal skulls that do not look human-like. They look more alien-like. But the other thing that has come up with some testing that has been done is sometimes under the right conditions, holographic images can be recorded within the skulls, like when they're doing research,
right?
And images of extraterrestrials and UFOs came up. Now, what I do not know is that showing the origin of where they may be coming from, or is that showing the skulls are working like a video camera that recorded around it in its presence in the past that the Earth was visited by extraterrestrials and spaceship? So I don't know what the answer about that is. But if I go with my intuition, I think that humanity was gifted with these long ago to help us in our spiritual evolution. Another theory that came up in our first book that I did with Nasserino and Bohm, Mystery of the Crystal Skulls Revealed, was the possibility, now this gets into the hollow earth, which again is another controversial subject, but I think there's shots from space that show that there's an opening at the North and the South Pole and light is coming out of it, and that explains the aurora borealis. That he was claiming that the people who live on the inside of the Earth, if the Earth is hollow, gravity holding on the inner surface, they have their own crystal skulls as well. So it may be possible, if this is true, that maybe not the galactics brought the skulls, but these tall beings that maybe they're descendants from Lemuria and Atlantis that are living inside the Earth, they had their own skull, and a few of those snuck out onto the surface of the planet.
Hold on, Joshua. We've got to take our break. We'll be back on the other side, X-Zone Nation. Please don't go away.
Don't pour your love out on me, baby. If you do, then I think that maybe I'll just lay me down, cry for 100 years. Don't pour your love out on me, honey. Take my heart, my soul, my money, but don't leave me drowning in my tears. You say you're gonna leave, gonna take that big white bird.
Joshua Shapiro is my special guest this hour, www.cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. Joshua, is it possible that the people who gifted this planet with the crystal skulls fashioned the skull and its mystery in the shape of a human skull so that we would pay attention to it instead of just using some other form, some other way of presenting this skull to us? Is it possible that they knew that one day all the dots would connect and that the true meaning of the crystal skulls, their importance to humanity and to the world would be known and shared?
I think you're absolutely right, Rob, that the shape, like a human bone skull, it makes a lot of sense, because I've actually had experiences where sometimes we have our crystal skulls out in the public, and if it was, just a regular piece of crystal in a strange shape, people could walk by you and they wouldn't pay any attention.
Right.
But when somebody walks by us and they see the skulls, sometimes they just point and they walk away. Or like one time when I was going through, I was in England and I was coming back, and I went through, the X-ray machine. They're able, apparently, the X-ray machines are so sophisticated now. This guy in London that was looking at my skull through the bag, he personally wanted to see it because he had seen the Indiana Jones film and he thought maybe it's fantasy, maybe they don't exist. And so he asked me to take it out for him. So, so I think the shape is very important, and it's what causes people to be curious. Now, like I said before, I remember in the early days where we didn't have digital photographs, we had to go to the store and get our pictures developed. And I would take pictures of skulls, and the people there would look at it and go, "What are you doing with that? It's, so dark and everything." But I definitely feel it's the shape of it. And also, I believe that the shape of our bone skull was intentionally done this way so that we could receive cosmic knowledge and information. So if it's true that the shape of our bone skull is able to do this, and they're making a crystal skull, and crystal already is able to receive and send all kinds of different frequencies of energy, and putting that into the shape, then these crystal skulls become these very powerful objects that can be tools to assist humanity. So I definitely think that its shape is important.
Joshua, earlier you were saying that you went down to South America to look for, I believe it was the blue crystal skull?
Yes.
Why South America? Why have the majority of the crystal skulls and the research that have gone into seeking the crystal skulls, along with explorers like yourself, why is everything focused on South America? Why do you think that those who created the crystal skull, who had obviously far more intelligence than we have right now, why would they choose South America instead of, let's say, Heartland, USA, the prairies of Canada, Stonehenge? Why South America?
Well, the only way I can answer it is a vision I had when I was in Peru, when I was looking for this blue skull. But first, let me define what it is, because it's a very strange circumstance that I'm in.
Okay.
I'm looking for a crystal skull that I have a vision of very clear, and I see it around me in my mind's eye all the time. But that means it's not in the physical reality. So essentially, I'm looking for a crystal skull that I don't know. Either I'm imagining it, or it's fantasy, or it exists on some other dimension and it's communicating with me. And it will decide, because it seems to be a very conscious being to itself, whether it's going to come out or not. But while I was on my first trip going to Peru, intentionally looking for this, I'm wanting to meet it in person. I still have not done that. I still only see it in vision. I had a vision when I was meditating with my smoky quartz skull, Portal de Luz, of Atlantis. That when Atlantis was, right before it was going to be destroyed, Atlantis had these colonies all over the planet. And South America definitely was one of the places where it had colonies, as well as probably in Mexico too, and maybe even some parts of the U.S. And what I recall from the vision was being with some other people from Atlantis. Atlantis is on the verge of sinking under the water, and we are taking sacred objects from Atlantis to South America because we know that South America, for the most part, will be untouched, let's say, by the modern world. And this is quite true. If you travel throughout South America, there is a large part of South America which is like nature and jungles, and there's no civilization around there whatsoever. And so I think that the Atlanteans knew that these artifacts would be protected. They took them to their colonies in South America, and they just said, when it's the right time, they could see in the future for humanity, there would be a time where we would have a technology similar to Atlantis, which I believe now is this time, and that we would have many challenges. We have wars going on, country against country, technology being used, many people in poverty, some diseases. We have a lot of challenges going on right now.
We sure do, yeah.
They had this sensing that these artifacts would be necessary for the future of humanity. Now, let me take that a step further. What if I indeed was on that anti-gravity craft that went from Atlantis to South America, helped to bring those artifacts there? Then I reincarnate now, and now these artifacts are needed to help humanity. Would not the skull, if I was connected to this blue skull, which is what I believe, be calling to me? Be saying, it's coming time now for me to come out. I want you to write a book. Even though I'm not physically out, I still want you to write about all the things that happened to you when you were in South America. I went there 3 times looking for it. And each trip, different things happen. But I was very smart, because when you go to Peru, you're in a higher vibrational state. And if you try to remember everything that happened to you on the trip, you won't do it. So I brought a little computer with me, and every day I just typed everything that was going on and that happened to me. Whether it was important or not, I just recorded everything. And now I'm actually going back through that book to update it right now, because it's linked to the new novel we just came out with. The Blue Skull shows up in our novel. And so I want those 2 books to be linked, so that if a person reads the novel and says, oh, this blue skull, that's interesting. Oh, wait, Joshua has this book where he talks about looking for it and all the things that came to him. So that's why I think South America is such an important part, is the Atlanteans knew it would be untouched, and they brought a lot of their artifacts there. And I believe coming up, maybe within the next 15, 20 years, these artifacts will show themselves and definitely help humanity.
I've heard a lot of stories about Atlantis, the Atlanteans, the theories behind where this mythical land was. There's a lot of speculation by a lot of different scholars, researchers, explorers. And the information that I've been able to gather from everyone that I've had the experience to talk to is that the Atlanteans were very smart. They were very futuristic. How come they couldn't save themselves?
Well, this is what Edgar Casey said, and I think his explanation is the best one I've heard. He said that, and I have a book also I found in a library by Seattle that also kind of supports this, that there were different periods of time in Atlantis where actually they had utopia, where religion and science and spirituality all worked together. But what happened in the later parts of Atlantis is there were 2 factions. There was a scientific faction that only cared about the physical reality and had no interest whatsoever in spirituality at all, which we could say this is kind of how it is for a lot of people right now.
Sure,
and
sounds
then
like
there was another group of people who were very spiritual and worked with the priest. And in the book that I received, it talked about that there was another group of about 40 or 44 priests, and they would meet and they would record sacred wisdom and knowledge, and they would be teachers for their people and everything. So I think what happened at the end of Atlantis is the 2 factions start fighting with each other. And the spiritual group had the visions, Atlantis is going under, we better take our sacred objects and our records and everything, and we better put them in secure places. And that's what I felt, is that I was a part of that group. And then the island sank, and they're kind of a lot of the Atlanteans are reincarnating now, so we do it right this time. Instead of destroying our planet or our country or whatever, creating a third world war, it's time now for peace to happen. And that's always been the message that I feel is representative of the crystal skulls, that they have returned to help us to create world peace.
Joshua, you and I have to take our final break for this segment. Please stand by. Exonation, if you'd like to find out more about Joshua, if you'd like to get any of his books, read his website. It's in depth. Spend some time there. Let it sink in. Go back. Read it again. Read his books. A lot of work, a lot of thought, and a lot of, what's the word here? A lot of hypothesis that makes a lot of sense went into his books as well. Visit his website, cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. We'll both be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My name is Rob McConnell. Don't go away.
The continent of Atlantis was an island which lay before the Great Flood in the area we now call the Atlantic Ocean. So great an area of land that from her western shores those beautiful sailors journeyed to the South and the North Americas with ease in their ships with painted sails. To the east, Africa was her neighbor, across a short strait of sea miles. The great Egyptian age is but a remnant of the Atlantean culture. The antediluvian kings colonized the world. All the gods who play in the mythological dramas, in all legends from all lands, were from fair Atlantis. Knowing her fate, Atlantis sent out ships to all corners of the earth. On board were the 12. The poet, the physician, the farmer, the scientist, the magician, and the other so-called gods of our legends, though gods they were. And as the elders of our time choose to remain blind, let us rejoice and let us sing and dance and ring in the new. Hail Atlantis!
Way down below the ocean.
Welcome back, everyone. An appropriate song for this hour. Of course, that's Atlantis by Donovan. And our guest this hour is talking about crystal skulls. We've talked about Atlantis. His name is Joshua Shapiro. His website is cse.crystalskullexplorers.com. As always, Joshua, thanks so much for coming on the show. Great pleasure having you with us. And where do you think Atlantis is?
Well, originally, I believe what Casey said, that it was in the Atlantic Ocean, that it went through different periods where it was a huge continent, then it broke into 3 islands, then it was 1 island, then it was gone. But recently, there's a lot of information coming out of Antarctica that I think is very interesting. Besides the fact they say there are pyramids there and there's things buried underneath the ice, there are some people who are starting to think that Atlantis may actually have begun there, which means that the Antarctic was at one time not in an area which was frozen. It had, a subtropical climate, which would support, I guess, that the Earth's axis is shift periodically. So I think there's some tie between Antarctica and these islands in the Atlantic.
Why do you think it was Plato who brought forth the information about Atlantis and no one else?
Well, I would guess that the Greeks were probably a colony of Atlantis at one time, and they probably stored some records from the Atlanteans that they, just had secretly,
Right.
and possibly Plato had access to those records.
Has there ever been any evidence found of Atlantis?
I think the major evidence of Atlantis comes from near the Bimini Islands. They found some structures under the water.
Right, the Bimini Wall, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I think, which is part of Atlantis, which I've actually held one time, is what was called Dr. Brown's Atlantean crystal ball. That was the most amazing artifact. I felt very honored that the ball literally was placed in my right hand, and it's still there.
Wow.
The essence of it is still there, but the ball itself exploded when it was taken to Mount Shasta, so it doesn't exist anymore. It's in pieces. So, which is a shame but there was a difference between the Atlantean ball and the crystal skulls I worked with. They're both quartz crystal.
Yeah.
The crystal skulls seem to have a living consciousness inside of them, and the ball seemed to have a program intelligence. Because I work with computers, I'm used to interfacing with an artificial intelligence through the computer that's been programmed by people who've created the operating system. My sensing is that the ball responded automatically to the vibrational essence of the person who was holding it or working with it, but it wasn't like the skulls where you're talking to something that's alive. You're having a conversation with something working through the skull that's alive. So that was the difference for me.
How much harm was caused when Mitchell Hedges, called his skull the Crystal Skull of Doom? Was that a big PR screw-up?
Well, obviously, I don't agree with him have had several experiences with that skull.
Right.
It could have been, just to get attention. I don't know. I don't like to try to speculate why other people do what they do.
No, but I guess what I was trying to get at, Joshua, if Mitchell Hedges would have put a positive connotation on the skull, let's say the skull of ancient knowledge, would that have been a greater asset to the exploration, the research, and the looking for crystal skulls, instead of it having a negative connotation, which it still does today with many people, because you and I discussed that earlier?
Right. I think that would have been a better way to look at it, definitely, because that's the way that I see the skull. That's my experiences are based on it. But everything happens for its reason and purpose. I think also, too, when that skull came out in the 1920s, people were not really ready for it. They didn't understand what it was. They weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
There wasn't this great interest. Really, the interest in the crystal skulls doesn't truly begin until the 1970s, when the first book comes out, and then they have TV shows about it, and then the Mitchell Hedges skull is shown on Mysterious World, Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah.
So really in the 70s, that's when it started taking off. And then in the 80s, it came back, and then all of a sudden modern carvers are starting to make them, and it's never stopped since then. So it could be that name was given because it was an artifact that came out that people didn't understand. And, again, I think the Mayans, they understood it was a sacred artifact. But why would they gift it if that story's correct? People challenge the story, how it was discovered. The bottom line for me is, doesn't matter how it was discovered. The key is that it has impacted positively and still impacts positively many, many people. Because we brought Bill Holman, the current Guardian, to Seattle in 2016. And, I just kept watching each person as they came out of the session. Their eyes were lit up. They were like in heaven. And then they wrote to us afterwards about positive change happening to them after that. So I think it's really important. Do we have a quick moment at all, Rob, to get into the new novel, which focuses on the skull?
Sure, let's go. That's good. That's a great idea.
Okay. So I'm very proud. Well, as an author, I'm always proud when I get a chance that I can bring a book out. But in January, we came out with a new book, and it was done as a team effort. Karen Tucker in England is a novelist. I am not a novelist. I needed some assistance. I just had this story that came to me in 2014, which was linked to the crystal skulls. But the whole idea of the novel, and it's called Journeys into the Unknown and Back Again, is it's kind of like, an explorer type. And I will admit to you, Rob, I put a lot of my experiences into the story for the main character.
Right.
But, he's out there just like I am, and he's researching crystal skulls and UFOs and all the paranormal and everything. And all of a sudden, he starts to have a sequence of events that happen to him that show him that he has to take a trip to Peru. He's being invited to go through a dimensional door to the other side in order to not only experience it, but the spirits on this side, the living beings that live in these dimensions, they figure out, and I'm not going to tell your listeners how this came to me, but it's a perfect solution. They figured out how he could record everything that happens to him in these other dimensions. And he would be able, when he came back, to start showing like 3D holographic video to people exactly what happens to him, who he meets on the other side, and the conversations, the places he visits, and everything. So this is a very difficult book to write because, most of us have maybe some idea, or maybe we've seen some movie about what could the life be on the other side. Where do people go when it's our time to leave here, and all of that. And but we're in book 2. Book 1 basically introduced the character. That's what came out in January. People can find it on our website. They can go on Amazon. It's there on Amazon now. They get to meet the characters, and so the first book ends as our main character, our explorer type, is about to walk through the dimensional door high up in the Andes Mountains that he's been guided to, and book 2 starts when he goes through this dimensional door, what he sees on the other side. So part of the reason for my doing a novel is because, a lot of people, if you give them a book and say, okay, these are my real life experiences, if they're religious or scientific or whatever, they're not going to want to read your book, but people are very open to fantasy stories. So I'm taking, I guess, literary liberties to try to put in there as many things as I believe is actually true that's been going on the planet, different phenomena, different activities. Crystal skulls are, of course, involved, and the blue skull shows up because he can't go through the dimensional
Joshua,
door
I hate to do this,
it.
my friend, but the time is up when you and I must say so long for tonight. But continued success and Exonation, please visit Joshua's website, www.csc.crystalskullexplorers.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.